this is the book that I shall, in some sense, summarize. It's about the creation of the modern university that we all are part of, the world of modern universities that we're all part of. And the point, broadly speaking, of course, is that universities are very old, but the modern research university is not that old. In fact, it's almost exactly 212 years old. And it actually doesn't begin here at the University of Manchester, a place that I wish I were at the moment. It begins here in Berlin in the year 1810. Germany had a great history of universities before the 19th century. But in the aftermath of the Napoleonic defeat of Prussia, the King of Prussia, Frederick William III, says something quite remarkable for a political leader. And I quote, "We will replace with intellectual strength what we have lost in material strength." They had lost a third of their territory. And he deputed this gentleman, Wilhelm von Humboldt, to create what in retrospect is the first modern research university, the University of Berlin, there never having been a university in the Prussian capital to that point in time. And again, of course, universities are very, very old and very distinguished in various, whether from Padua or, of course, Oxford and Cambridge. But Humboldt determined that in an age, certainly in the beginning of an age and still in an age of both Enlightenment science, that a university should be devoted not simply to the passing on of knowledge, but to the creation of it, to research, and that it was a job of professors not simply to teach, but to advance knowledge, and that they should do so, secondly, in tandem with their students, the unity of research and teaching. Third, they should do so in an environment insulated from politics. Even if founded by the state, there should be institutional autonomy in the modern university. Fourth, professors should have Lehrfreiheit and students should have Lernfreiheit, the freedom to teach and the freedom to learn, what we call, as Peter just described, academic freedom. Fifth, the center of the university should be what we would call the philosophical faculty, the faculty of arts and sciences, as we would call it in the United States, with professional schools much less important. And education for the professions had been at the center of what German universities and most others were up until that point in time. And if you know the history of the modern university even a little bit, you will know that that the Germans absolutely dominated the 19th century. They set new standards for the rest of the world. And the arc of this book is simply this: if the Germans defined the modern university, the research university, in the 19th century, and everyone else followed, and if the Americans had a pretty good 20th century, at least second half of the 20th century, in which they could lay claim to being the leaders of higher education in the world, what are the prospects then for Chinese leadership in the 21st century? And I apologize to my British friends to not have the great British universities as part of this story. Not that they are not great, but in this narrative, they were not the ones who actually would set global standards. They would be part of it, of course, and part of this great story, but not the absolute leaders of it as the Germans were in the 19th century. And so, a call to Berlin, to this place here, 𝗂𝗶𝗏𝗆, across from the former university library, across from the place, this defines, and virtually every university, old and new, including the Oxbridge institutions, redefine themselves according to a number of these norms. And even in the United States, and perhaps especially in the United States, universities become serious universities by adopting German models. After all, think of what the motto of Stanford University, not far from where I am sitting today, is. Well, that motto is in German: Die Luft der Freiheit weht, the wind of freedom blows. Almost no one at Stanford can pronounce this today, but nevertheless, that is their heritage from the latter part of the 19th century. But the wind of freedom, of course, stopped blowing in Germany in 1933. And the story of German universities is a story of rise, global dominance, and then self-destruction, first by the National Socialists, and then during the Second World War, and then by the division of Berlin during the Cold War. This is John Kennedy speaking at the Freie Universität Berlin, the alternative university to the then communist university that was the heir to the old University of Berlin, the Humboldt University. I actually was a student at the Freie Universität Berlin in the 1970s, not during this time, a place that was also a place of very radical and interesting debates. I actually took a seminar on Marx as a student there in the 1970s. And there were maybe 15 students in that seminar and 6 different communist parties, all debating what Marx really meant. We'll come back to Marx later in this talk. But I got onto this whole topic actually about exactly 12 years ago when I began thinking about it, not writing it, when I was at the 200th anniversary of the University of Berlin, now called the Humboldt University. And the president of that university, the great model of all modern universities, welcomed us by saying, and I quote, "Nobody would take my university as a model for anything today." He was very quickly no longer the president of the Humboldt University, but here we have this great university, no longer the best in the world, the best in Germany, or not even the best in Berlin. Times change. The Americans take, if not certainly not a leadership role right away. My university, Harvard, named for this gentleman, or at least the likeness of this gentleman, which emulates British institutions in part in its architecture, and was for many centuries, several centuries, a pale colonial and post-colonial imitation of Oxbridge colleges, but not at all a serious university, becomes a research university only in the second half of the 19th century with the establishment of German norms of activity, research activity under Charles Eliot, and becomes a serious university in the natural sciences and applied sciences under the presidency of James Conant before, during, and after the Second World War. You know, one thinks, at least at Harvard, is, oh, gee, this place has been great forever. And in the very first ranking I ever came across, it did very well. So-called men of science, Wissenschaftler, people who do serious research. And Harvard, look at how small these numbers are. Harvard had, it was bigger at that time, so it had more than anybody else. But pound for pound, the best university in the United States in 1910 was not Harvard. It was Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts, which was the Caltech of its day. Harvard much further down the list. And you look over this list and you see some universities remain in this game and others do not. Times change. I'm here at the University of California at Berkeley. And let me just say, this book is done as a series of case studies of the universities that I'm discussing here today, or at least some of the universities that I'm discussing. And the University of California at Berkeley is in many ways the site of the greatest aspiration of American higher education, founded by Yale faculty with German models. It becomes the flagship of the best system of public higher education in the world by the 1960s, 70s, and beyond. But it is a university and a system in serious crisis. It used to be that if you got a Nobel laureate at Berkeley, you would get a building. Then you would get a laboratory. Now you get a parking space. Again, things change over time and not always for the better. And I swear they have more Nobel laureate parking spaces than they actually have Nobel laureates today. If you walk around the campus, it is a place with great aspirations and limited capacities, sadly, at the moment. Like many American universities, too consumed with the American obsession with intercollegiate athletics, and they will be paying for this renovation of California Memorial Stadium until the year 2040. a very serious financial burden for a stadium that sits on top of a major earthquake fault. They have a global campus in Richmond, overlooking San Francisco Bay, as a public university, not able to establish large presences abroad, but trying to bring the rest of the world to it. But this campus has been looking like this for the last decade, without a global partner yet to be identified or supported. It is a place, let me go back for a moment and just say, the great thing about Berkeley, it is, of course, still one of the world's greatest universities, great research universities, but it is in one of 44 out of 50 American states that is disinvesting in public higher education. And if these institutions continue to disinvest in public higher education, the entire American system will suffer. The private universities, which compete for the same faculty and graduate students, also will decline. It is the greatest warning shot to be heard in the world of American higher education today. A more positive story is this place, named for this gentleman, James B. Duke. Here you see him smoking one of the 25 cigars he smoked every day. And he lived reasonably long for that day and age. A man who did more than anybody else to addict both Americans and Chinese to nicotine, very successfully. He establishes this university, reestablishes what becomes Duke University in the 1930s in this gorgeous neo-Gothic campus, which Aldous Huxley said it was the most wonderful essay in neo-Gothic that he had ever seen, a place that was designed to look like a great and old university, like the Oxford or Cambridge. Even the steps were designed to be preternaturally worn, as if generations of scholars had walked upon them, which they had not. But at some point, the people at Duke woke up to the fact that they looked like a great university, and they knew they were not, sometime in the 1950s. And for the last 7 decades, they have worked relentlessly to rise in an age even before rankings, to rise to be among the top research universities in the United States by central planning and by careful pruning, which most universities don't do. And they've become the most self-consciously international of the leading American research universities, with a medical school in Singapore and a beautiful campus of a liberal arts college in Kunshan, outside of China, outside of Shanghai, something that I know something about, as I was Duke's senior advisor on China in the establishment of this liberal arts college. This brings us now to China and to the universities of China that are today about 130 years old. Here's the campus of Yenjing University, today the campus of Beida, Peking University. Here is Peking University students on May 4th, 1919, doing what they have done virtually every generation, causing trouble for governments. This is the great and iconic chancellor of Peking University during the May 4th movement, Tsai Ing-wen, trained in Leipzig, a great admirer of Wilhelm von Humboldt, a great believer in Lernfreiheit and Lehrfreiheit, a great believer in the centrality of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, even closed the business school at that point in time, if I am not mistaken, and engineering. And he brought to the campus extraordinary individuals with different points of view. Hu Shi, the great liberal thinker, as well as Chen Duxiu and Li Dajiao, the founders of Marxism in modern China. A man whose name today adorns the extraordinary liberal arts program at Beida, the Yuanpei program. You have other institutions. This is the former campus of National Central University, established by Chiang Kai-shek in 1930, established on the model of what was still then the greatest university in the world, the University of Berlin, hence this Brandenburg Gate to welcome you into it. Today, it's the campus of Southwest University. Or you have the campus here of Tsinghua University, established in 1911, quickly established in 1911 as a place to send Chinese away to the United States with returned boxer indemnity funds, bringing extraordinary talent to its faculty, becoming the greatest research university in China by the 1930s. This gentleman here, Jiang Tingfu, a great historian, educated at Oberlin and at Columbia through boxer indemnity funds in the first instance, was the teacher of my teacher, John Fairbank, who learned his Chinese history at Tsinghua University under Jiang Tingfu in the 1930s. When its first campus, built on American models, looks very much like the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, a beautiful Midwestern campus in the northwest part of Beijing, in part because it was the president of that university that convinced the American president, Theodore Roosevelt, to remit boxer funds for this purpose. It has also an extraordinary president that sets the standard for what Tsinghua University could be, still today known as 清华大学的永远的校长, the Professor 𝗪𝗧𝗪 as president, who leads Tsinghua University through the 1930s and is the leader of what becomes National Southwest University, leading Chinese students to Southwest to Lianda during the 8 years of the Sino-Japanese War. And it is this is a motto that commemorates a professor who committed suicide in political protest much earlier in the 1920s, Wang Guowei, but it is a motto that comes to define the academic creed of Tsinghua in those days, but it is still known today by every faculty member on that campus. One should have 独立之精神，自由之思想， spirits independent and minds unfettered. Tsinghua University, as you know, of course, times change again. Looks no longer in this part of the campus like Urbana-Champaign and a little bit more like Moscow State, with Soviet influence in the 1950s and the 1960s. It suffers under the Maoist-led Cultural Revolution. But even during the Cultural Revolution, some people do graduate from this institution. This gentleman, who would, I understand, go on to have a very successful career so far. And Tsinghua University today is home to this place, Sushimin Shuyuan, Schwarzman College. And I have to say, I'm on the board of this institution, helped to design it, not the physical structure, but the concept. Aspirationally, this is to be the Rhodes Scholarship for China and for the 21st century. The hope is that the best and the brightest of the world will come now to Tsinghua University, a place founded to send people away, now trying to draw the best and the brightest of the world to Tsinghua. And here, with apologies to my friends at Oxford, the idea here is that why would a brilliant young person these days want to go and take a Rhodes at Oxford, as great a university as it is, to a cold, rainy, foggy, self-isolating island off the coast of Europe, when you could go to Beijing and have beautiful blue sky days like this every day? Who knows if that's going to happen? That's the aspiration. That's their aspiration, I should say. Okay. So this is, we're in this moment of great ascendance of Chinese universities. This is one of the 8 campuses of Zhejiang University, welcoming international partners. This is the campus of Westlake University, an extraordinary university with as really a research university, almost I would call it the Johns Hopkins of the early 21st century, as Johns Hopkins was in the 19th century, pure research, pure graduate institution. Shanghai Tech, aspirationally another Caltech. SUSTech, Nanfang Keji in Shenzhen, growing extraordinarily fast and well. And this is why the great universities the world over have been going to China to establish linkages with this fast-growing system. Your own university, in particular here, this is the center in Shanghai that most of you will not have seen for 3 years. thanks to COVID. But this is the Manchester China Center. Now, I think not the whole building. I could be wrong there. Not far from the Harvard Center in Shanghai, which is also not the whole building, but one floor of this, and many other universities as well. This is our classroom in that building. But I have to confess that as active as Harvard has been in China, we're probably even better known today for our SUV, the Harvard SUV, the 𝗂, as it is called, one of hundreds and hundreds of copyright infringements, but a very good car by every account. You see Chinese universities rising in global rankings. The numbers matter much less than the trajectories. We're just watching the shifting tectonic plates of higher education here. And in one of the most recent rankings here, you have 𝗂𝗏 number 12 in the world, the QS ranking, Tsinghua number 14 in the world, and number 18 in the world, below both of these, is a small but very well-known university on the northern shore of Long Island Sound in the state of Connecticut, my home state. I forget the name of it. Yale University, that's the one. And from a Harvard perspective, this seems exactly right. So the question to bring this toward a conclusion is, how can China not lead? If the Germans defined the modern university in the 19th century and the Americans had, to use a baseball metaphor, some very good innings in the 20th century, is this not China's century? Well, here's one reason maybe why not. Still statues of a man who did more to destroy education in China than any other human being outside the gates, sometimes inside the gates of Chinese universities. And if you ask any university president quietly, why do you still have a statue of Chairman Mao outside your university? They will say, we missed our chance to take it down in the 1980s. Or you have these students, getting back to the study of Marx. President Xi Jinping has urged all Chinese students in universities to study Marxism. And there are, of course, required courses in Marxism, Leninism, and so on. These incredibly idealistic students at 𝗂𝗏, at Nanda, and at Renda, among other places, formed their own independent study groups. They went and they read the real Marx, and they went out and started forming unions in sweatshops in South China. That's, as it turns out, not what Marxism means today, and they were severely punished, and several Chinese university leaders were punished also for admiring their work and supporting their work. Or we can take this example back at Tsinghua, two extraordinarily courageous professors, strong critics of China's president, 𝗀𝙁 and Xu Zhangrun. On the annual anniversary celebration of Tsinghua's founding, they're coming to present flowers to that memorial to Wang Guowei, to spirits independent and minds unfettered. But they find the memorial is under construction. In Hong Kong, home to great universities, not yet under the Chinese Communist Party, there are now the beginnings of change, and not for the better in terms of the rule of academic freedom. And you have finally three major universities in China, Renmin, Nanjing, and Lanzhou, that have withdrawn from international rankings to pursue what they call a 中国特色的教育, a education with Chinese characteristics. But this is the exception, not the rule, part of the current political wind in China today, to be sure. But the fact of the matter is, Chinese universities have grown up in a world of shared aspirations of universities, learning from others, adapting from others, creating on their own. They have grown up in the company of the great universities of Europe, Britain, and North America. That is the company they wish to keep, and that is the company that they aspire to lead. Can Chinese universities lead the world in the 21st century and define the modern research university yet again? I think the answer is actually yes, but not alone, because they are part of a shared world of knowledge. Let me just close with a few pictures of universities, and not universities. This is now a former military gate welcoming people into what is today a city of learning and culture. This is the new gate for commemorating National Central University in Nanjing at Nanjing University's new campus. This, of course, the famous gate of Tsinghua University, of the Tsinghua-yuan. This beautiful gate here, which I wish to visit in person whenever given the opportunity. Universities are places that welcome people in from around the world in a shared world of learning. And it was through this gate here at Harvard University, the building in back, University Hall, is where I had my office as Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. Through this gate in 1936, for Harvard's 300th university, came this gentleman, Hu Shi. And he was the representative of 𝗵𝗏, of Peking University. He received an honorary degree at Harvard's 300th celebration, an enormous celebration. And he gave to the university, on behalf of Chinese alumni of Harvard, this stele, which if you ever visit Harvard's campus, you will see right next to Widener Library. Difficult to read because it's worn a bit, the characters are worn a bit, and it's in classical Chinese without any punctuation. But to assist you, I've put it out this way. And here is what Hu Shi wrote in his own calligraphy on that, inscribed in his own calligraphy on that stele. Culture is the lifeblood of a nation, and it is, of course, by virtue of culture that a nation arises. But it is truly due to learning, 学, or research, as Humboldt might call it, that a culture flourishes. Intellectuals with deep knowledge and far-sighted vision understand that in establishing a solid foundation for their nation, the utmost priority must be given to the enhancement of learning. This was a centerpiece of the experience of German universities in the 19th century, of the rise of American universities in the middle of the 20th century, and it is believed today by the leaders of Chinese universities, if not always by those who dictate the politics thereof. And let me stop there and thank you very much for your patience.